Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another Question the Narrative video, and today's video is called It's Starting to Come Together. I'm really excited about this video and what I'm going to share with you today. And we're going to cover things from petrified bodies to the mudflood, to melted buildings, to the short season, to the inheritors, and yes, to the Bible. Now, I have to point out that I will often get comments saying that they like when I talk about these truth or topics, but they don't like when I bring the Bible into it. But I'm going to be honest with you. That's the whole point of my Question the Narrative series. I look at the truth through a biblical lens. So in order to look at these topics, I have to use the Bible for that, because there is no truth if you do not use the Bible to seek that truth. So I have to get this out there. And I'm going to admit that I'm a bit nervous about today's video, just because I had been talking in my last video about the difference between the millennial kingdom and the new heavens and new earth. And I had a lot of questions asking me, well, what do you believe? What is your opinion? And that really wasn't the point of that video. That video was just to point out the difference between the millennium and the new heavens and the new earth. And I got a lot of great comments. I got a really good email that I'm going to share at the end of this video today and just comment on that. But you know what? I really at that point wasn't comfortable sharing with you my thoughts, because I will tell you what, I've been studying Revelation and I'm not sure at this point where I stand. But I've decided that rather than waiting until I finish studying Revelation, I'm going to share the process of my thoughts with you, because it's never my intention here to tell you what you should think or to even be any sort of authority for you. My intention is to just get you to open up your Bibles and to look at these things for yourselves, which most of you do. And I really appreciate your comments. Even when I don't agree with you, I appreciate it. And a lot of times I will even come around to thinking, you know what, that person might be right about that. So at this point in time, I believe that it is very possible that much of Revelation has already happened. And that's not to say that we may not see similar things in the future, because there is nothing new under the sun, and we know that history is cyclical. But in order for me to explore these topics with you today, I think it's important that you know what perspective I'm coming from. I'm coming from the idea that much of what was written about in the book of Revelation has already happened. Because actually, I think it's the very first verse of Revelation, it says, must happen quickly. And I might get into a video about this sometime soon, but I'm not ready at any point to do something like that yet. But just so you know, that's where I stand, and that's where I'm coming from when it comes to the things I'm going to talk about today. I realized today that many of the topics that I discuss here, like the petrified bodies and the mud floods and the melted buildings and everything, they all could fit very well into the Bible. And that's what I want to discuss with you today, because I was actually pretty excited about some of the things that I realized today. I'm not telling you that I know for a fact that I am 100% right. That's one thing that I try not to do, because you always need to leave room for the idea that you might be wrong about something. So I'm never going to come at you with something that says, I know that when it comes to this topic, that I 100% know that I'm correct, because I am a fallible human being and I could be wrong, and I don't have the answers to everything. So that's one thing that I ask, is just please don't look to me as thinking that I have all the answers, because I know that I don't. But that's why I'm actually sharing this process with you, is because I like to have accountability as I'm researching these things, and I like to have your ideas. So anyway, so I've talked about flood bodies before, and I mentioned that channel to you in a few of my other videos. And I have mentioned the idea that many of these petrified bodies that we seem to be finding, which a lot of times they pretend that they're not actually petrified bodies, but we know that they are, that's likely what they are, could very well have happened during the flood. And this is something that we know is possible because of things like woolly mammoths that were found petrified, giving birth. Or there are fossilized fish also that are giving birth or that are being eaten. And so we know that it can happen, that things can just suddenly come about in a way that is almost instantaneous. So a lot of the petrified titans that we're seeing, the elephant that I just showed you, um, now I will say that in this day and age, you never know what's photoshopped anymore, but I'm just sharing with you some of the things that I found here. That certainly looks like a sleeping giant there. And yes, we do know that during the flood that many of the giants would have died. All the people died other than Noah and his family. And it's very possible that we are actually seeing evidence of the people or the creatures that were left behind during that time. Now, I have to say that this I found on Instagram. That's the account that I found it on. And it's this was off the west coast of Italy. And it's said to be a statue. And most of the other photos that were in with the slides, they looked to me like statues. This one, however, to me looks like it could definitely have been someone caught mid whatever it is that they were doing. It doesn't look like something that would actually be a statue. It looks like a more natural position, someone who was just going about his daily life, doing whatever he was doing when all of a sudden, bam, something got him. So one of the questions of how these beings got this way, or when it happened, I think it can be answered simply just by looking at the flood. I think that that is the most likely answer for most of the, I was going to say geological, because they certainly look to be stone. They have been turned into stone. But remember, one of the sayings, I don't remember where it originated, but geology is biology. And I do believe that for the most part, that is true. Someone shared a comment with me, or it could have been an email recently. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember specifically where I found it, but somebody left a comment to me pointing out that Jesus actually said that he has come to fulfill the law and the prophets. And I'm going to read to you specifically this verse from Matthew. It says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." So, what does fulfill mean? Fulfill means to complete. And most of the time, when people are looking at this verse, they're focusing on the law aspect of it. Yet I have never once heard anyone talk about what it would mean for him to complete the prophets. And the question is, when he said that he also came to complete the prophets, does he mean to complete the prophecies of the Old Testament, which, yes, some of them are speaking directly about Jesus himself, but many of them are speaking about Armageddon and the millennial kingdom? Did he come also to fulfill those prophecies as well? And that's kind of where I'm going to start at with the rest of this. There's a car backfiring outside if you hear it, so that's just awesome. But let's move on. Mud floods are another huge topic in the truther community. And that's another question, just like with figuring out where all these flood bodies come from, is where did these mud floods come from? Was there one? Was there more than one? And, I don't have the answer to that as to whether there was more than one. Now, what I do have to say is, first of all, a lot of people will say, well, what about God's promise that he would never flood the whole earth again? First of all, I would have to say that if it was the type of flood of the biblical flood, it wouldn't have been the whole earth again for these mud floods. I don't think that there would have been any time that it would have been to the level that Noah's flood was, where everything was completely submerged and it was the entire earth. But what I also have to say is that I don't think the mud flood was actually a flood like that. I think the mud flood was very likely the result of an earthquake or multiple earthquakes, maybe in different points of time. And there are several times in the Bible when earthquakes are mentioned. And one of them actually is when Jesus was crucified and when he died, the earth quaked. Okay, so what happens during an earthquake? Well, there's soil liquefaction, and there's going to be all kinds of mud in the aftermath when it comes to these earthquakes. Another mention of an earthquake is actually in Revelation 16. In verse 18 of chapter 16, it says, "Then the thunder crashed and rolled, and lightning flashed, and a great earthquake struck, the worst since people were placed on the earth. The great city of Babylon split into 3 sections, and the cities of many nations fell into heaps of rubble. So God remembered all of Babylon's sins, and he made her drink the cup and was filled with the wine of his fierce wrath. And every island disappeared, and all the mountains were leveled. There was a terrible hailstorm, and hailstones weighing as much as 75 pounds fell from the sky onto the people below. They cursed God because of the terrible plague of the hailstorm." What if some of the mud flood evidence that we are seeing actually took place during this time? Now, obviously, this one is more recent than what that would have been, although I do have to say that even if most of Revelation has already happened, I believe that it is much more recent than what we've been led to believe. I believe that there also could have been another time that there was another earthquake, possibly during the time if Satan would have been released again. I haven't gotten this far yet. If Satan would already have been released again for the short season, I believe, and I mentioned this in another video, that it's possible the earth would have quaked then as well. And so you're all probably still wondering, okay, so what is your stance? My stance is I'm not sure about any of this yet. I will still say, though, that I do not believe that Tartaria as a nation has anything at all to do with the millennial kingdom. I just don't. From all of the evidence that they actually were identified as Gog and Magog, or they actually identified themselves as Gog and Magog, to them being an epicenter for the Nephilim, and in fact were the place where many of the Nephilim arose from, to the name itself, Tartaria. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why are certain places named after certain people or other places? It's to commemorate them or to honor them. There is no other reason that a place would have been named after Tartarus, the place where the angels who sinned were bound. There is no other reason that someone would have adopted that name other than to honor that place. So no, I do not think that that nation itself had anything at all to do with the millennial kingdom. So yes, I'm back in Revelation 20 again. And I think this is important because I think this is the key to figuring out much of what we've been looking into. And the reason that I actually started reading Revelation 20 again today is because I'm trying to figure out the truth of the resurrection. And again, these are all just things that have come to me as I've been reading it, and I could 100% be wrong. And the reason that I was actually looking into the resurrection is because someone had asked about who the inheritors of the reset time could have possibly been. So I just want to read to you, first of all, the 1,000 years, this section. And I'm going to tell you my thoughts when I actually read it today, because I try to read Revelation 20 without preconceived notions. And it's very hard when you have been, hearing something different for years and years and years and years. But then when you actually read it yourself, you're like, what I've been taught doesn't make sense. So hear me out on this. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, until the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be released for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. Also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So let me show you this again. Also, I saw the souls, no, it just went away, but also I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Who came to life in that resurrection? It was the martyrs. It was those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus, I believe, during the tribulation period. And those who had not worshipped the beast or its image would also have been during the tribulation period. Now, I told you that I'm kind of leaning towards everything having happened already in the past. And if that's the case, then this would be in the past. If I'm wrong, then this would be in the future. But regardless, it seems to me that during this resurrection, at this point in time, it is the martyrs of the tribulation. I've always been taught that it's all the believers at this time, but that's not what it says. Now, if you have any other verses that say something different, please leave a comment. But from what I'm reading here, it doesn't sound like that. Now, I know that people will often leave a comment about the verse where I think it was Paul who's admonishing someone for saying that the resurrection already happened. But we need to remember that there is going to come a point in time in history that the resurrection will have happened. So when Paul was admonished and was talking about that teacher, it was about that specific teacher at that point in time. We can't take that verse and universally use it forever, because there's going to come a point in time where the resurrection will have happened. So we need to keep that in mind. So anyway, from what it sounds like, the martyrs came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The martyrs. Then it says, the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. So again, and it's talking about the martyrs. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. So what most people will tell you is that the rest of the dead are the sinners who are going to be judged and sent to the lake of fire, because all of the believers have already been resurrected. But I'm going to show you why I believe that there will be believers also in the rest of the dead. So let's continue on. And when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea. And they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence earth and sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. So to me, it sounds like there will be both believers and unbelievers at this point in time. So the rest of the dead could very well have included believers. I'm wondering if it is the martyrs who were resurrected at the onset of the millennial kingdom, and everyone else is resurrected after Satan is thrown into the lake of fire. Or at the very least, it wouldn't even be the lake of fire, because it tells us that the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. So that would be around the same time that Satan will be released from his prison. Okay? Because it says here, when the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison. So we know that. After the 1,000 years, Satan will be released. And then at this point in time, that's also when the rest of the dead will come back to life, is also during the 1,000 years, which is why I'm starting to think that it is very possible that they may have been the inheritors. Now, another thing that someone pointed out, actually several people, but also in the email that I'm going to be sharing with you, there are those who believe that Gog and Magog also has already happened. And if you look in the prophecies of the Old Testament, Gog and Magog is prophesied in there as well. So would that come with Jesus coming to fulfill that prophecy as well? And I had never heard that anyone thought that Gog and Magog had already happened, but I do think it's possible, especially with the way that history is covered up. But before I actually get into Gog and Magog, I want to just go back here quickly and reiterate my thought about this point in time. Because it says here that they got the book of life out. The book was opened. The dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So what this tells me here, and if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. That tells me that some people's names will be written in the book of life at that point in time. Because otherwise, this whole process of pulling out the book of life seems like it would have been a moot point because no one would have been in it. But it says, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into a lake of fire. And also, so you might be wondering, okay, but what about everybody who died after the rest of the dead came back to life? And I'm wondering if that's what this means. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Is it possible that they could be those who were born or who had died after the rest of the dead came to life? I hope that I'm making sense to you. So if these people were brought to life when Satan was released as the inheritors, then it may mean that they were also around during the battle of Gog and Magog, which, what does it tell us about the battle of Gog and Magog? Well, interestingly, it says, fire came down from heaven and consumed them. What if, and I'm just saying what if, because this is about asking questions, these melted buildings that we have been trying to figure out what happened to them and how they got this way, what if this happened during the Battle of Gog and Magog, when fire was rained down from heaven? I don't know, but I think that it's certainly a question worth asking. So if we go with the premise that all of this has already happened, would that put us in the short season? Yes, it would. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, and someone actually brought this up too, and again, I don't remember if it was a comment or an email, but will the people living in the short season even know that they're in the short season? I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us that. It doesn't tell us much about the short season at all. But the fact that so many people are coming to the conclusion that we are living in the short season now makes me wonder if finally we're coming to the end of that short season and people are realizing where we are at that point in history. But now let's go back to the beginning of the short season, when the inheritors would have come about. Could these people who inherited what was left over, possibly after the Battle of Gog and Magog, I don't know, after some sort of reset, Could these have been the people who were the rest of the dead? I don't know, but I'm looking into it. And if you think about it, if the rest of the dead were resurrected at that point, if they came back to life after the 1,000 years were ended, there would have been babies. Think of the baby incubators. There would have been children. Think of the orphan trains. Now, is it possible that some of the people who were still living there, and knew everything was going on, that their children could have been taken and they could have been sent to lunatic asylums? Yes, I think that's certainly possible. But I think the other thing is possible also. They could both be possible, and it could have been a combination of the two. So now I just want to get into this email. And this is by someone named Joshua. I wasn't sure how he felt about his last name being broadcast everywhere, so I just cut it out, but his name is Joshua. And he sent me this really long and detailed and informative email. And I'm just going to read through it and I'll comment on it when things come to mind. You asked me which verse referred to Christ physically reigning and him having enemies during his reign. Here is my response. I would carefully search the verses I referred to and all surrounding verses. These were all Old Testament prophecies of Christ's 1,000-year reign and the battle of Gog and Magog. I tell you these things because it's clear you are gentle in spirit and open to the truth. And yeah, he had originally tried to respond on YouTube, but you know how YouTube will kind of count really long comments sometimes as spam. So they won't even show up for me. Like if I go back and try to approve them, they don't even show up there for me sometimes. So this is what he had originally tried to say. Men had come to Christ to get to know him and the gospel. And that's in Zechariah 14:17. And it shall be that whoso will not come up of all the families of the earth unto Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. Now men lived to be 1,000, and his enemies died early for speaking against the gospel, is in Isaiah 65:20. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one who does not reach the age of 100 will be thought accursed. So I am willing to admit when I am wrong. I said in the last video that the Old Testament prophecies all seem to be speaking of the new heavens and the new earth, but there will be no death in the new heavens and the new earth. So in that case, then yes, this would need to be referring to the millennium, in my opinion. Gog war happened already after his reign, Ezekiel 39:9. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth, and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, and the handstaves and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. We don't use wood-handled weapons. Also, Tartary is a slanderous term used by Christ's enemies who came out of his reign. Tartarus is where God imprisoned the fallen angels who bred with women. His enemies came out of the millennium to raise those of the second resurrection. And this says the orphan babies and infantorium children, which I think some of them could have been, but I also think some of them would have been adults, after the battle of Gog. Satan is already in the lake of fire. This last time exists to prove that we can't blame beings for us being unbelievers and evil, and to show that God has allowed every system to exist to prove that the only lasting one of us can be of us with him in our glorified state. Now, this one I have to say that I don't agree with. I could be wrong, but the idea that Satan is already in the lake of fire and it's to prove that we can't blame any other beings, I would have to say that if that were the case, then all other demonic entities would also have to be bound or thrown into a lake of fire or non-existent also, because there is still much evidence of demonic activity. So there's still much evidence of possessions. There's still much evidence of hauntings, which I believe are caused by demonic entities and not, dead people. So that I'm not really kind of tracking with. But it is an interesting thought. But I would have to say that if we're kind of being tested so that we don't blame other beings, well, then they would all have to be gone, and they certainly are not. Um, let's see. Also, Scripture says, "Thus says the Lord God, this is Jerusalem. I have set her at the center of the world, with lands around her." I will not say that part, but read Ezekiel 38:11. I'm not going to say that part simply because of censorship. Read Ezekiel 38:11. This is about Gog and Magog attacking Israel. Christ still sits in his ever-existing physical glorified body at the center of the earth. The third resurrection and great white judgment throne is the only prophecy unfulfilled at this point. All will be judged based on one thing. Do you believe the gospel, or do you believe you are getting better and sinning less plays a part? All who don't agree that Christ's blood is the only way to heaven will be cast into eternal destruction. And that I do believe with. I do believe. Now, where is the center of the earth, you might be wondering. A lot of people will show you one of those Mercator maps. I think it's the kind that they use in schools, and they will show you, oh, look, there's Israel. It's in the center of the earth. Is it really, though? If we actually look at a map, especially if we're using biblical cosmology, the North Pole would actually be at the center of the earth, right smack dab in the middle of the earth. And this is it right here. Then he goes on to say, but you are correct. The new earth and new Jerusalem do not exist yet. Christ allowed the real Israel at the center of the earth, surrounded by mountains, to be rebuilt. He sits at his throne at the dead center of the earth, directly below his Father's throne in heaven. They are connected by Mount Maru, the magnetic mountain, which is where Christ's throne is. The earth was made with God's electromagnetic power by way of Christ's voice. All things were made through him. When believers die today, they go to the center of the earth in their new bodies. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So speaking of Mount Maru and the magnetic rock, what is it right in the middle of this North Pole map? Is a magnetic rock. Also, what is found at the North Pole and up in the Arctic region is the Aurora Borealis, which is strikingly similar to the colors of God's throne. And I've done a video on this about, is it possible if God's throne is sitting on top of the firmament right there at the North Pole, and these colors are coming down from that throne? And that just kind of gives you even another glimpse of, if it's possible, if Jesus' throne is at the North Pole, would that also account for these colors? And yes, a lot of people think that it has to do with electromagnetism and things like that. And I know someone's going to ask, what about the Aurora Borealis that is seen at the South Pole? I can't find the video, but there was actually a video demonstration showing that if there was like a glass dome over something, now obviously not glass, but some sort of hard reflective dome over an area, if there is a light in the center, that light will extend outwards and will also be visible around the outer edges of that glass bowl or whatever it was that they were using in the experiment. So yeah, so that's not something that I've ever really thought about much, that aspect of it at least, about Christ actually being there and that Israel possibly being there. But it is certainly another thing that's interesting to think about. And then the last thing that he wrote, Scripture can be confusing because God is outside of time. He often prophesies about different events in the same place. He speaks of the new earth in the same chapters as he speaks of the 1,000 years. Okay, and then he says, okay, now I'm really done. Sorry. No need to apologize because this is really interesting. Now, I have to say that this is actually exactly what my pastor told me, because I have an awesome pastor and he is not afraid to answer any questions that I have. He's great. So I texted him a few days ago when I was trying to figure out Isaiah 65, because I noticed how the subheading in my Bible said new heavens and new earth. But then as I was reading on, I found that verse about babies living to 100 years old and people who don't live that long will be considered cursed. And I'm like, wait. The subheading says new heavens and new earth, but here we have several verses down they're still talking about people dying. That can't be the new heavens and the new earth. So I did text him about that. And this is basically what he told me as well, that he prophesies about different events in the same place in the same time, and how he was speaking of the new earth. He said, I believe my pastor said that many times the prophets would talk about things further out in time first, and then they would link them together with other prophecies that were closer up in time, and that was why both um, the new earth and the millennium were in the same passage. So yeah, so I stand corrected on that, and I want to thank you to everyone who brought that up to me. I hope that I covered everything that I wanted to. If not, I'll remember it later and possibly do another video. But again, just remember, I don't have all the answers. I am just sharing with you my journey on trying to figure this all out because, you know, I love the Lord and I love the truth. And I just want to make sure that, you know, I'm able to honor him by making sure that I'm seeking him out. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.